Hi, I'm Darlene. At my own birthday, my sister raised her glass and said, "She still lives off handouts." The whole room laughed, but no one knew my portfolio manager was about to call. On speaker. They thought I was the weak one, the one who never figured it out. But what if I told you they erased me from the family trust, cropped me out of photos, used my money to host the very party where they humiliated me? And still, they smiled like nothing was wrong. So tell me, how do you stay quiet when your own family rewrites your story to fit theirs? The gravel under my heels crunched louder than I expected. I slowed down, adjusted the strap of my purse, and took a deep breath before stepping into the courtyard. The Kane estate was glowing with string lights, polished marble, and the self-importance of old money trying to look casual. My family had always mastered the art of showmanship, but tonight, they perfected erasure. A large welcome board stood at the entrance, etched in cursive gold. Merrilee's Charitable Gala, honoring family. I stared at it longer than I should have. My birthday, my money, her name. A valet nodded toward me, hesitating. Miss, are you with catering? I smiled tightly. No, I'm with the family. Inside the foyer, people milled about in curated dresses and well-practiced laughter. My mother floated by in navy satin, the same expression she wore at every fundraiser, gracious, untouchable. A guest leaned in, whispering loudly enough, "Is that Merrilee's assistant? Or cousin?" I kept walking. It wasn't worth correcting, not here. Someone passed me a glass of champagne, and I made my way to the edge of the ballroom where the ceiling stretched high with imported chandeliers. Every detail had been chosen to echo taste, prestige, and Merrilee's vision. The signature cocktails were labeled after her childhood nicknames. There was even a branded ice sculpture, her initials carved into frozen pride. A tap on my shoulder made me turn. Merrilee, in a pearl-sheathed dress, leaned in with that practiced smile. "Dar, you made it! Perfect timing!" She wrapped her arms around me like we were close, like I hadn't funded the whole event and been left out of the program. "I have a little surprise for you later," she said, her voice syrupy. "You've always been special." I don't know what irritated me more, the fakery or the word special, like I was a charity case. After a few rounds of greetings and forced grins, dinner was announced. The ballroom doors opened, revealing long tables decked in candlelight and floral arrangements. My place card was missing. Merrilee gestured to the end seat like it was some kind of honor. During dessert, she stood and clinked her glass. "Everyone, if I could have a moment. Tonight, we're not only celebrating family, we're lifting up someone who's always needed a little help and always found her way back." My stomach tightened. She turned toward me. "Darlene, sweet sister, I got you something I think you'll love." A staff member brought over a wrapped package. I opened it slowly. Inside was a gently used leather tote. A flyer for a women's workforce reintegration program peeked from the pocket. "Figured it'd help you get back on your feet," Merrilee added. "They have great workshops, confidence building, resume coaching. I hear they even help with interview outfits." Laughter bubbled around the room, uneasy but present. My hands didn't tremble, not visibly, but inside, something tilted. I held the tote by the straps and nodded. "Thank you, that's thoughtful." Merrilee smirked, satisfied with the performance. Mother gave an approving nod, as if this was a necessary intervention. I returned to my seat, placed the bag under the table, and pretended not to notice the sideways glances. Later, while people danced and chatted, I slipped away toward the hallway. The slideshow had started. Clips of childhood, family moments, success stories. Merrilee at debate tournaments, Merrilee accepting awards, Merrilee hugging mom. I waited, foolishly, for even one frame of me. Not as background, just once. Instead, a photo flashed where I remembered standing beside my father at his retirement event. In this version, I wasn't in the frame. Cropped, clean. I wandered outside to the garden. The air was cooler, quieter. I leaned against the stone railing, watching lights from the pool ripple across the grass. No one followed, no one noticed. I had paid for this night. Every rental, every tray of appetizers, every curated jazz playlist. But I didn't know I'd bought a stage for my own humiliation. The air outside was crisp, enough to sting the back of my throat. I stood there longer than I should have, not because I needed a break, but because I wasn't sure if I wanted to walk back into that room and pretend any longer. But I did. Eventually. The music had shifted by the time I returned, the kind of jazz that tried too hard to feel sophisticated, but instead sounded like background noise for disappointment. I found my seat again, still at the far end of the table, still nameless. I took one slow sip of champagne, trying to cool the ache in my jaw before it hardened into something permanent. Then merrily stood up. Her fork tapped the rim of her glass twice. The room quieted, not entirely, but enough. She didn't wait for full attention. She never did. She was used to assuming the room belonged to her. "I'd like to take a moment to say something," she began, holding her glass with the posture of a politician mid-campaign. "You know, every family has that one person we carry, don't they?" A few scattered chuckles. "That one sibling who means well, but never quite. Sticks the landing." Her eyes slid toward me, casual, like a blade laid gently across the table. "Some of us build companies. Others. Well, some still live off handouts." There was a sharp pause, followed by forced laughter from a few guests who didn't know whether to cringe or clap. Some smiled awkwardly. One woman next to me muttered, "Oh, wow," and reached for her water. I didn't blink. I didn't frown. I didn't flinch. I raised my glass to her from across the room, silent, steady, and drank. She wanted a reaction. She wanted the room to know I was small. Instead, I let them watch her tower over me. Because there's something worse than being dismissed. It's watching someone try too hard to look powerful. The rest of the speech blurred. I stopped listening the moment I realized this wasn't about me. It was about her fear that I might no longer be hers to define. A few minutes later, I stepped away. I didn't announce it, didn't ask permission. I walked the long path toward the garden again, but this time I didn't make it outside. I stopped near the open patio door, where the string lights cast enough shadow to hide behind. That's where my mother found me. Glendora moved like always. Quiet heels, composed lips, a scent of something expensive that didn't smell like warmth. She didn't ask if I was okay. She never had. "You didn't have to let her say that," I said softly. Not pleading, just placing it on the table. She adjusted a bracelet on her wrist, tilting her head as if the comment didn't register. "It was a joke, darling." I stared at her. "A joke." She nodded, tone clipped. "Besides, she's not wrong." My throat tightened, but I didn't let it show. She kept going. "You've always been fragile, Darlene. Sensitive. You were never built for this world the way Marilee is. She's got direction, drive. She moves things forward. You—" She paused, tilting her head again. "You float." Something in me stopped breathing, but not in a drowning way, in a surfacing way. I could have argued. I could have asked if she remembered who kept the lights on during Dad's surgery, or who wrote the grant that funded her favorite charity's expansion. But I didn't need to prove it. Not to her. Not anymore. I simply said, if staying silent is the price of being family, maybe it's time I start redefining what family means. She blinked at me, not used to resistance, especially not in that voice. I turned, walked down the hallway, and into the nearest restroom to collect myself. Inside, soft lighting and polished marble surrounded me, sterile and curated like everything else in that house. I leaned over the sink and dabbed my lipstick with a tissue. The face that stared back at me wasn't broken, but it wasn't whole either. It was unfinished, in progress, tired of apologizing for becoming something different. "They laughed," I whispered to my reflection. "They clapped. They nodded, as if I should be grateful just to be in the room." I pressed my palms flat against the counter, steadied my breath, and stood up straighter. There were no tears, no monologue, just a choice not to shrink anymore. Let them laugh. I've already paid for the microphone. I stepped out of the powder room, still adjusting the strap of my dress at the shoulder, still deciding whether I wanted to stay. The hallway was quiet now, the clink of glasses and buzz of small talk fading just beyond the archway. It gave me time to breathe, to recalibrate. I didn't go back to the ballroom right away. Instead, I drifted through the west corridor, passing familiar portraits of unfamiliar truths. That hallway had always bothered me. The family wall, as Mother called it, framed evidence of worthiness: weddings, award ceremonies, society galas. The images weren't just curated, they were editorial, and in almost every frame, Marilee stood in the center, polished and celebrated. I stopped in front of one I hadn't seen in years, a gala from our father's final year at the firm. I remembered the night clearly. I had flown in from San Francisco, changed in the back of a taxi, and still made it in time to stand beside him during his retirement toast. I even remembered what I wore, a navy pantsuit and flats, because I hadn't had time for heels. In this version of the photo, I wasn't there. I took a step closer. My father stood smiling, Marilee at his right, Mother just behind. The space where I should have been, gone, cropped, rebalanced, erased like I had never shown up at all. I didn't feel angry, not anymore. What I felt was weightless, like a ghost who had shown up to haunt her own life. A small voice piped up beside me. "Aunt Darlene, were you not invited to that party?" I turned slightly. It was Eleanor's daughter, Harper, maybe 8 or 9. Her fingers were sticky with frosting, eyes wide and genuinely curious. "I was there," I said with a soft smile. "But not everyone sees the same story." She looked back at the photo. "That's not fair." I crouched to her level. "No, it's not. But it helps me remember who really matters, who should be in the picture." She nodded, like she understood more than most adults in the house ever had. I stood and kept moving, my heels muffled by the thick runner. It didn't take long before I reached the edge of the kitchen entrance, where a staff member asked if I needed anything. I shook my head and slipped out to the side hall, past the linen closet, and into the small study off the guest wing. 2 weeks ago, I'd sat in a very different office. That day, it had rained. The kind of spring rain that doesn't cleanse anything, just soaks through your coat and makes traffic miserable. I had met with Jonathan, the family's longtime estate attorney, to finalize quarterly adjustments for the foundation's reinvestment structure. We had worked together for years. As he flipped through the file, his voice softened. "You should be aware. The revised family trust doesn't list you anymore." I blinked. "I'm sorry?" He cleared his throat. "Your name was removed. Glendora requested it last summer. Said you weren't in a position to manage long-term estate responsibilities." There had been no warning, no conversation, just a silent decision that I no longer qualified. I didn't cry then either. I just closed the folder and nodded once. "I see," I said. "Well, good thing I've been building my own." I thought about that now, standing in the study, the contrast of that sterile law office with this ornate, over-perfumed house. They edited me out of a photo, then a trust. Eventually, they'd probably rewrite family history, so I was never part of it at all. But maybe that wasn't entirely bad. I walked back toward the party, not with bitterness, but with an unfamiliar clarity. The air felt different. Or maybe I did. They had always treated the Kane name like a gate. You earned it by compliance, by staying quiet, by fitting the frame. But I had stopped fitting a long time ago, and I had no interest in getting back inside. I passed Glendora talking to a banker in the corner, her voice bright and well-practiced. Marilee was being photographed with donors near the champagne fountain, tilting her head at that exact angle she knew played well in press releases. I didn't interrupt them. I didn't need to. What I'd built couldn't be cropped, or edited, or conveniently left out of the family slideshow. It didn't need their stamp. It had mine. I didn't need the name. I built something they can't redact. I moved through the dining room just as the servers began clearing empty dessert plates. The scent of caramel and espresso still lingered, faintly masking the bitter edge of everything else. I kept my head high, not because I felt strong, but because I refused to let anyone here see anything they could twist into weakness. The lights dimmed again, and I knew what was coming. A projector flickered on near the dance floor, illuminating a large white wall that moments earlier had been covered in hand-painted ivy. A journey of strength. The Dunch Cane women appeared in gold script, glowing like something sacred. I took a seat near the back, close enough to see, far enough to be forgotten. The first image was a childhood shot of Marilee, front and center at a school spelling bee. She was maybe 7, holding a trophy half her size. The next few slides followed the same rhythm. Marilee volunteering, Marilee graduating, Marilee shaking hands with local council members. Each photo was crisp, posed, and perfectly lit. Then came Glendora, graceful in her tailored suits, standing beside charity banners and speaking at podiums. Eventually, I showed up. Except, not really. In one photo, I was slumped in a hospital bed after minor surgery, Marilee smiling beside me like a concerned guardian. Another slide showed me, years younger, standing behind my sister while she held an award. My hands awkwardly cropped at the edges of the frame. A voiceover began, warm and sentimental. Every strong woman stands on the shoulders of the one who held her through weakness. Our family thrives because we lift each other. The message was clear. Marilee was the one doing the lifting. I was the one being carried. A few people turned to glance at me, subtle, but I saw it. A silent, shared expression. Sympathy, pity, a little confusion. Like they were rethinking everything they'd ever assumed about me, which would have been great if it had come from truth and not fabrication. The lights came back on to a round of soft clapping. Not for me, never for me. Just as I was about to rise, Glendora appeared at my side. Her smile was polite, polished, too clean. "I thought you might appreciate this," she said, pressing a cream-colored envelope into my hand. "It's just something helpful. You've always been my most emotionally intuitive girl." I opened it slowly. A prepaid certificate for a weekend women's retreat in Vermont. Emotional wellness, trauma healing, leadership workshops. I didn't look at her right away. I just stared at the card, absorbing every implication it carried. "You think I'm broken?" Glendora's expression didn't change. She tilted her head slightly, voice gentle. "Not broken, just unfinished." I folded the envelope carefully and returned it to her outstretched hand. "Thank you," I said, "but I'll pass." She blinked. "Darling, it's not a judgment." "Of course not," I replied, stepping past her. "You just paid someone else to deliver it." The music had returned to its earlier rhythm. Soft jazz, politely forgettable. Across the room, Marilee stood near the mic again, offering her closing remarks with just the right mix of sentimentality and showmanship. As people raised their glasses to toast the legacy of powerful women, I slipped into the side hall. They could have their performance. I had already lived the reality. Somewhere along the corridor, I paused. The hush of the hallway, the muted footsteps behind closed doors. It was all suddenly clearer than anything said over a microphone tonight. I pulled out my phone, opened the email draft I had started earlier that week. The subject line still read, "If I ever have to explain myself." I stared at the blank body of the message, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I hit save and locked the screen. I used to think they misunderstood me, misread my silence, my distance, my refusal to play along. But now I saw it for what it really was. They needed me diminished, easier to carry than to confront. They needed me small to feel big. The last of the applause faded as I returned to my table, my steps measured, deliberate. The lights stayed low for a moment longer, long enough for me to reclaim my seat without attracting attention. I sipped the last of my champagne, letting the bubbles sting. Across the room, people leaned in toward one another, already pivoting to their next topic: networking, foundation grants, vacation homes. And then Eva appeared beside me. Ava Townsend, someone I hadn't spoken to since college, not really. She leaned in close, as if sharing a harmless secret. "I don't mean to be rude," she whispered, her voice honeyed with the kind of fake concern that never lands well. "But I heard you've been on unemployment? Merrily said something at the alumni brunch, said you were still trying to figure things out." My gaze slid to hers, calm, flat. I didn't rush the answer. Instead, I smiled, tipped my glass ever so slightly, and asked quietly, "Did she mention who signs her foundation's back-end checks?" Eva blinked. She straightened, mumbled something about needing to find her husband, and didn't speak to me again for the rest of the evening. I didn't mind. The lights dimmed once more, this time for what they announced as a final tribute to the next generation. I knew what was coming. Another slideshow, another carefully curated narrative. On screen, the title card glowed in bold serif letters: "The Next Generation of Kane Women." A soundtrack of soft piano trickled through hidden speakers. The first slide featured Marilee, again, at a leadership summit. Then her posing with Glendora at a Women in Business luncheon. More photos followed, smiling with politicians, cutting ribbons at charity events, mentoring interns like she invented the word. And then, me. Just one photo. Grainy, overexposed, clearly 5 or 6 years old. I remembered the dress because I'd donated it right after that evening. The caption beneath the image read, "Still discovering her path. We're proud of her perseverance." No mention of what I'd actually done. No nod to anything real. Around me, a few people shifted uncomfortably. A whisper behind me cut through the soundtrack. Did she ever even finish Columbia? I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The whole point of the slide was to invite doubt, to paint me as a puzzle never solved, a story without a real ending. The music swelled. The screen faded. A polite clap followed. I stood. Not quickly, not with flair, but with intention. I crossed the room, bypassing the caterers, ignoring Glendora's subtle shake of her head from the corner. I walked straight to Marilee, who stood near the dessert table, all charm and poise and false modesty. She saw me coming, and for a moment, I saw it flicker, the recognition that I wasn't playing anymore. "You can lie all you want," I said, my voice low but firm, "but you might want to double-check who underwrites your silent partners before spinning your next story." Marilee's smile barely faltered. "Darlene, don't be dramatic. It was lighthearted." I stepped a fraction closer. "You think this is light? Keep pushing. Next time, I won't be quiet. I'll show you the weight of what I've built, publicly." I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and walked out of the ballroom, past the marble pillars and servers and gold-rimmed glasses. As I passed the grand piano, I paused for just a moment, watching a man in a tux awkwardly fumble through the keys. Offbeat, out of rhythm, exactly how this family felt now. I pulled my phone from my clutch, opened the Notes app, and added one line under the email draft I had left open earlier. "They need the illusion. I only need the truth." Just as I tucked my phone away, the lights in the ballroom dimmed again. A soft chime rang out. Glendora's cue for a champagne toast. I knew the rhythm by heart. This was her favorite part of any event. The clink of crystal, the soft lift of a glass, and the perfectly timed anecdote that made her sound charitable without revealing anything true. I hesitated at the threshold, debating whether to return to my seat or let the night continue without me. But something in me didn't want to hide anymore. Not after what I'd just said to Marilee. So I stepped inside. The servers moved gracefully between tables, pouring the last round of bubbles. The piano player resumed his soft melody. And just as Glendora raised her glass with rehearsed grace, my phone vibrated again inside my clutch. I fished it out instinctively, glancing at the screen. It was Camden. Before I could silence the call, I heard his voice, clear, steady, and devastating, echoing across the entire ballroom. The overhead speakers crackled once, then came alive with his words. "Hi, Darlene. Just confirming the $12.4 million rollover into the new fund. Your allocation strategy looks rock solid. I'll lock the ESG side this afternoon." Every chair froze. Every hand paused mid-toast. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered near the dessert cart, the sound piercing through the awkward silence like a warning shot. I didn't move. I didn't have to. The room had already turned. All eyes were on me, including Marilee's, her expression flickering between disbelief and something far more dangerous: exposure. I waited 3 seconds, long enough to feel it land, then walked slowly toward the main table. No rush, no drama. When I reached Marilee, I slid an envelope across the table. She stared at it like it might bite. She opened it carefully. Inside, a detailed invoice. Venue rental, paid. Full catering, paid. Lighting and decor, paid. Live music, valet staff, floral arrangements, line by line, each one itemized and stamped as processed from my own holding company's private ledger. Paid in full. Quietly. Weeks ago. "Enjoy the evening," I said, addressing no one in particular. "The house is on me." And I left. The hallway felt different now, lighter, less like something I needed to escape from, and more like a place I'd just stopped apologizing for occupying. I moved toward the garden again, slipping past the portraits and candlelight without a second glance. Outside, the night had settled. The air was cooler. I could hear the faint hum of murmurs starting to bubble behind me, the kind of noise that meant something had cracked, and no one knew quite how to seal it back up. My phone buzzed again. A text from Camden. Didn't realize the mic was still synced. "Want me to call back?" I smiled. "Perfect timing. You said it better than I ever could." I looked out over the manicured hedges and the flickering string lights that had once made this place feel like a fairy tale. Now they just looked like theater dressing. In the silence, I felt the shift. Not just in them, but in me. The laughter had stopped. The clapping had faded. And for the first time, perception wasn't something they could control with polished photos and strategic seating charts. Let them talk. The truth just took the mic. I left the garden just after 10. By the time I got back to my apartment, I had kicked off my shoes, peeled off my earrings, and was halfway through wiping off my mascara when my phone buzzed again. Then again. Then again. At first, I thought it was Camden checking in. But when I picked it up, the notifications didn't stop. Mentions, tags, messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. I tapped into one of the links, still sitting in front of the bathroom mirror in my slip. The video had been uploaded barely 40 minutes earlier, shot vertically from across the ballroom. It was grainy, a little shaky, but the audio came through perfectly. Marilee, standing with her glass raised. Some of us build empires, others still live off handouts. Laughter, applause. Then silence as Camden's voice took over the speakers. "Hi, Darlene. Just confirming the $12.4 million rollover into the new fund." I watched myself blink in the video, not flinch. Just stand there, stone still. At the bottom corner of the screen, someone had added a caption in bold white font. "Birthday ambush." The view count was already at 312,000. Within the next hour, it hit 1.8 million. I kept scrolling. "Y'all, this woman paid for the whole party and got dragged like a stranger." That's not teasing. That's financial gaslighting. Rich families love to humiliate the kid they can't control. She's not the problem. She's the mirror they don't want to look into. For the first time all night, I exhaled. I didn't post. I didn't comment. I didn't even like any of it. I just watched. And the internet did what it does best. Connects dots faster than any family can scramble. The next morning, while I was nursing a quiet coffee by the window, the emails started rolling in. Not from strangers. From names I recognized. Old friends, former coworkers, even 2 exes. I had no idea. If I ever laughed at a story they told about you, I'm sorry. Wow, that video hit different. I didn't answer any of them, because the truth wasn't new. It was just louder now. By noon, Glendora had released a carefully worded statement to the local paper. Private family moments taken out of context should not become public spectacle. We love all of our children equally. Of course she did. Marilee posted a short video to her foundation's page, wearing a blazer and just enough makeup to look relatable. We support Darlene's journey and always have. Families tease each other. It's how we show love. I'm heartbroken this was misconstrued. The comments weren't kind. You didn't tease, you embarrassed. Imagine building your empowerment brand on someone else's back. This is why women don't speak up in families like yours. I watched it all unfold from my balcony that evening. The sun dipped over the Hudson, lighting the river in streaks of copper and gold. The wind moved slow, steady, like it had time. I sat there with a blanket over my knees, a cup of mint tea in my hand, and let the buzz play in the distance. I didn't need to defend myself. They had told on themselves. Glendora's statement got picked apart on a podcast by a woman who had been disowned for marrying outside her race. Marilee's foundation page lost thousands of followers overnight. A major brand partnership disappeared before the weekend ended. Someone even unearthed an old article where Marilee took credit for a business idea I had floated to her years ago. I hadn't thought about that in forever, but the receipts were still there, in emails, timestamps, drafts. The internet doesn't forget. I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat, I didn't even smile. I just let it burn, because for the first time, I didn't have to explain. I didn't have to soften the edges of the story to make it palatable. They wanted to control how I was seen. I let the truth do the seeing instead. I ignored the interview requests, the DM offers from women-centered publications asking for exclusives, the podcast invites, the morning show angles. I wasn't interested in making this a spectacle. That had been their specialty. I had work to do. Quiet work. Real work. By the time Thursday came around, Marilee had been dropped from a major campaign tied to women in tech. The press release didn't name me, but it didn't have to. Glendora stepped down from her board position to spend more time with family. No one asked which family she meant. And me? I deleted the draft email I'd held onto for months, the one titled, "If I ever have to explain myself." I didn't take them down. They collapsed under their own weight. The morning after everything unraveled, I was already halfway through my second cup of black coffee when the screen lit up with a headline I hadn't expected to see so soon. Mysterious CEO behind disruptive fintech revealed. Meet Darlene Scov. The news segment played on every major finance network, one after the other. The anchors repeated my name with that same mix of fascination and hesitancy people use when they realize they've underestimated someone. They showed footage of me walking out of the JP Morgan headquarters earlier that week. The camera angle wasn't flattering. I wasn't posing. I wasn't smiling. I was simply leaving a meeting, coat slung over my shoulder, folder in hand, earbuds still in. Just doing business. But suddenly, that simple image was revolutionary. The anchor continued. She's been quietly funding major shifts in the fintech landscape. And, perhaps most unexpectedly, she also funded the infamous birthday party where she was publicly shamed by her own sister. I watched, not because I needed validation, but because I wanted to see how it felt. And honestly, it felt quiet. It felt done. Screenshots of the Jataum birthday ambush clip flashed next to my corporate headshot. My resume filled the lower third. Stanford alum, private capital strategist, founder of Haven Equity. There was no mention of Marilee, no quote from Glendora. For once, I existed in a story without being edited into the background. By noon, the headlines had changed their tone entirely. Words like dignity, strategic, and poised were now being used to describe me. I didn't laugh. I didn't smile. I just closed the laptop and went about my day. Later that evening, I received a forwarded link from a colleague. Marilee had made an appearance at a public fundraiser in Soho. She arrived on the arm of Nate Carlisle, my ex. A man I had once seriously considered marrying, back before he became more interested in hedge fund PR than anything real. The tabloid caption read, "Merrily Dunch finds love amid controversy." The photo showed her laughing too hard at something he'd said. Her arm wrapped just tightly enough around his to make a point. A few sources leaked that she had personally arranged the date, that it had been set up specifically for the photographers waiting outside. A desperate move to seem unfazed, to reclaim power through illusion. I didn't feel betrayed. Not really. Nate and I had ended years ago, and if his ambition aligned with her vanity, they were probably perfect for each other. But it was Glendora's move that hit lower. She gave a quote to a legacy magazine the next day. "All families argue. Darlene was always the more sensitive one. She just didn't like being teased." Teased. As if my erasure had been a game. As if I hadn't been erased at all, but had simply refused to laugh along. I didn't issue a response. I didn't do interviews. I didn't hold press conferences. Instead, I called my assistant and told her to release the internal report we'd been refining for weeks. It included the full funding structure of Haven Equity, every stakeholder, every dollar traced, every policy linked to public access, transparency, and female-led capital reallocation. Then I wrote one line. I sent it to Bloomberg. My work has always spoken louder than I ever needed to. This moment is no different. No hashtags, no photos, no link in bio. Just clarity. I also finalized something else that afternoon. A new foundation. One designed specifically to fund women rebuilding their lives after being pushed out. By families, by institutions, by silence. I named it after my grandmother. The only woman in the cane line who had ever seen me without agenda. Not my mother, not merrily. And I didn't dedicate the foundation with a speech or a gala. I did it with a wire transfer, a statement of purpose, and a promise to never use another woman's pain as decoration for my own image. They played games with masks. I built something that didn't require one. 2 weeks later, I stood in the back corner of a community center in Beacon, sipping weak coffee from a paper cup, watching kids scurry around folding chairs like they were part of an obstacle course. No gala gowns, no hors d'oeuvres passed on silver trays, just cracked tile floors, warm light, and the unmistakable sound of people showing up because they cared, not because a camera might catch it. A volunteer handed me a stack of pamphlets for the Foundation's first public meet and greet. I nodded, thanked her, and tucked them into a canvas tote. A few women who had benefited from our first round of grants spoke at the front of the room. Raw, unrehearsed stories about leaving abusive homes, re-entering the workforce, fighting for custody, rebuilding. One woman held her toddler on her hip the entire time, and no one minded. In fact, they leaned in closer. That was the moment a girl, no older than 9, walked up and tugged gently at the hem of my coat. She had a jelly stain on her shirt and a program clutched in her hands. Her hair was braided tightly, like someone had taken their time that morning. "Miss Scov?" she asked, shy but curious. I crouched to meet her eyes. "Yes?" She held up the brochure. "You were in here. You look important." I smiled. "Well, sometimes I am." She hesitated, then asked the kind of question only a child dares to ask so plainly. "Were you ever sad when people said you weren't smart or good at stuff?" I wasn't ready for it, but I didn't flinch. I took a breath, then answered honestly. "I wasn't sad because they said it," I told her. "I was sad because, for a long time, I believed them." She looked at me for a second longer, then leaned forward and gave me the smallest, fiercest hug I'd received in years. "You look like a superhero now," she said, before running off to rejoin the other kids near the snack table. I stayed where I was, staring at the space she'd just left. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't headline-worthy. It was real. Later that evening, back in my apartment, I stood barefoot in the kitchen, peeling an orange while the evening news murmured softly from the TV in the next room. "Merrily Dunch," the anchor said, has officially stepped down from her position as head of Empower Forward, following months of public pressure and internal restructuring. No montage, no tribute, just a sentence, factual and final. Another segment followed, this time about Glendora. She had taken a leave of absence to focus on her health and family. There were no interviews, no farewell op-eds, just quiet. A week after that, a card arrived in the mail. No return address. Just 6 words in handwriting I'd seen my entire life. You were never supposed to win. No signature, no threats. But I knew exactly who wrote it. I folded the card once, placed it in the same drawer where I kept my grandmother's recipe book and the last birthday card she ever wrote me. There was no rage in me, no satisfaction either, just understanding. I went for a walk that evening, down by the river. It was chilly, but not bitter. I passed a few joggers, couples walking dogs, a group of teens laughing too loud for the space they were in. I kept my hands in my pockets, my scarf tight around my neck. I stopped at the same bench where, 3 years earlier, I'd nearly quit everything. I had sat there with an unopened job rejection email, a drained bank account, and no plan. I had stared at the water then, thinking maybe my family was right, that I wasn't built for this world. Now I looked out at the same river and saw something different. Not redemption, not revenge, but proof. Proof that silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't demand applause or headlines. It arrives in tiny, private victories, a full fridge, a rent check mailed on time, a foundation launched without a press release, a girl asking you, without hesitation, if you'd ever felt small, and believing you when you say you did. Back home, I opened my laptop. The old draft was still there. If I ever have to explain myself. I deleted it, then opened a new one. To future me. First line, we didn't break. We became. They tried to erase me from their story, so I wrote my own.